If you have any particular question, you are very welcome to ask them in the Q&A box during the presentation, and we will get to them after Lex's presentation. And you are also very welcome to wait the end, raise your hand virtually, and you will be able to unmute yourself and ask your question. The talk will last for approximately 35 minutes. And Lex has very kindly agreed to share the slides and the relevant references with participants after the talk. So you can expect an email from me with this. And now to introduce our speaker, Lex Bouter from Vrije University. Lex is Professor of Methodology and Integrity at Amsterdam UMC in the Department of Epidemiology and Data Science, and at Vrije University at Amsterdam in the Department of Philosophy. Lex is a leading international expert on research integrity, questionable research practices, and improving research culture and reproducibility. He has contributed extensively to global discussions on research misconduct, integrity training, and policy development. He combines empirical research, philosophy of science, and practical reform efforts. I'm very glad to be able to moderate this discussion myself. My name is Audrey Plant from UCD Research Culture. I'm the research engagement specialist, and I will now give the floor to Professor Bouter. Thank you again for joining us today.
Well, thank you very much, Audrey. After this wonderful introduction, it won't be difficult to disappoint, so thank you for that. What I will talk about mainly are academic novels on research integrity. I have published a preprint that contains 35 of them recently, but I already have 40 on my shelf, and it's still growing, the collection. So if you have books which are not in there, please tell me about it, because I really want to make the collection a little bit more comprehensive. But the talk has some other elements than these 6 books I will discuss. I will talk first about my qualifications a bit. Well, to be honest, more my lack of qualifications, which will become a disclaimer. Then move on the context of research integrity. What is the topic that these books are alluding to, these novels are alluding to, and why novels anyway? Are there no better ways to get insight in research integrity? And what are the pros and cons of these different modes of knowing about research integrity? And then finally, but importantly, what is it these books say about research integrity? Now, my career, I'm basically an epidemiologist, and I still am. That was my training, and I've done that. The main chunk of my career, mainly in primary care and public health. I became involved in leadership of my institution in 2006 as the rector of my university. That was limited to 7 years, the maximum amount of time I could spend there. And then I earned a sabbatical, and in the sabbatical, I moved on to different topics, albeit still related to research methodology. And I focused on research integrity, became interested in open science, and also did some work on reproducibility. And that is, although I'm now retired, formally, the domain I'm still active in and still deem to be quite important. And when you take this all together, I'm really poorly qualified to say anything about novels. So I apologize for that in advance. I'm an amateur reader. I have no skills in comparative analysis of novels. There was no study protocol. There were no exclusion and inclusion criteria. I had no search strategies to identify the novels, and I know little of qualitative data analysis, and the little I know I did not apply in this preprint and in this presentation. So mainly my thing is a block of personal impressions of novels of research integrity. And if you're interested, you can see that in the preprint I wrote 250 up to 300 words per novel, saying what I liked in it and what I felt to be the main part of the plot which was relevant to research integrity. Now, maybe a bit of context on the thing, academic research integrity, that is important. there are moral aspects to being an academic, and you can label them in many ways, but my favorite way is say there is research integrity, there is research ethics, and there is responsible research. And while these three are distinct, there is overlap. And to some people, the overlap is huge, up to 100%. So all the debates about these three concepts is mainly about, as far as I'm concerned, about the overlap between these circles in the Venn diagram. And to give a little bit of indication what I think they mean, at least what I find useful, is that research integrity is about truth and trust. And the behavior that hampers that specifically. And that can be behavior of the individual, the individual investigator that is, or the collective, or the consortium, or whatever. So it's about behavior, and it's about truth and trust. Research ethics is, to me, mainly about what you can and what you cannot do to humans and animals in your studies. And finally, responsible research is about the benefits and harms of research for society and also the environment, of course. Now, research integrity is mainly codified in code of conduct. There are some countries with laws bearing on research integrity, but it's mainly a codified thing. Research ethics is ingrained in laws in most countries, and there's a lot of compliance regulations you have to follow there, and rightly so, I would say. And responsible research is different because it's in the eye of the beholder to some extent. It's a political matter, it's a matter of convictions, it's a matter of debate, and usually attempts to codify it are not that successful, and there are hardly any laws about it. When people pontificate about research integrity, like I'm doing now again, usually you get a slide like this, saying there is a spectrum with 2 points on it, 3 points on it. The awful stuff is research misconduct, fabrication, falsification, plagiarism. The ideal world is called responsible research practices. It's relevant, valid, reproducible, and efficient. And there is a huge, large gray zone in between of more dubious stuff. It can be honest error as well, and it can be due to ignorance. Some people label it sloppy science, other people label it questionable research practices, and the whole together is a spectrum. And in the novels I've identified, this whole spectrum is visible. You see examples of everything, and it's so clear that these phenomena happen in practice on an enormous scale. And what you see also on an enormous scale are publication, because the real product to some extent of academic research is the research article. Now, collectively, we produce 7 million of these articles per year, which are published in 45,000 outlets. And the issue is that occasionally, or maybe often, something is published that should never have been published because it is fraudulent, it's fatally flawed, or it's ethically unacceptable. And the rule of the game is that once it's published and it belongs to each one of these three categories, it should be retracted. And overall, we're not that successful in that part of the game of the curation of the academic track records. And some people in academic research might feel like the guy over here. There is a kind of tsunami coming in front of you. It's growing, the wave, and maybe the red papers symbolizing the wrong stuff are more prevalent now. And to finish that part, here you see the exponential growth curve from less than 2 million 25 years ago to 7 million now. You see here that Asia is now dominating the numbers, declining the USA and the UK, and what is going up is China and India and also what is it? I cannot see that. I have to remove that one. Indonesia and is there as well. So this is how it looks in numbers. And here's some more numbers. Remember, I was an epidemiologist. So we did a survey in my country, and I have no reason to assume that my country is much worse than other countries. When you ask people, 4% admits of the scholars that to have fabricated data at least once in the last 3 years. I believe that's a lot, because reflect on it, when you have 25 colleagues in your department, one of them, on average, is a fraud. Well, there should be two in the neighboring department, because your department, you only have nice people, of course, I realize that. But still, and this is a topic that pops up in the novels quite often, fabrication and also falsification, and also questionable research practices, which in the survey turned out to be more the rule than the exception. More than half of that engaged frequently in at least 1 out of 11 QRPs in the last 3 years. And when you look at the evidence on the publication level, which is the level I just alluded to already, and by the way, this is not solid, sound evidence. There is a great lack of solid research, understandably so, because we are investigating stuff that most people want to hide. We do retract currently about 0.2% annual of the papers that are published are retracted. But there are many educated guesses say that this should be at least 10 times and maybe 20 times as much, because these papers should never be in the literature, according to the COPE criteria for retraction, and these criteria are quite strict already. You know the stories of the articles with pictures in it, pictures of Western plots or imaging techniques that depict the data of that paper. And something between 4 and 40% are fraudulent. We believe that now about 2% of the articles are fake, and probably half of the studies replicate when you try. So taken all together, and all the references are in the PDF you were promised by the introduction, 1 in 7 publications are not to be trusted, which is sad. Now, how come? And this is the stuff of the novels mainly. Well, it's due to individual factors, institutional factors, and systemic factors, most people believe. The individual factors is about the virtuousness of the individual, that is depicted by the compass here, the moral compass. But that moral compass is functioning worse due to, or better, due to institutional stuff like the research climate in the lab, and the incentives, which is part of the systemic factors. And I have a short example of each of them. This is the stuff which the codes are made from. They're all go back to the Metonian norms written in 1942 in the middle of the Second World War by an American called Robert Merton. It's really worthwhile reading. I won't list them all, but I especially like organized skepticism myself. And this is another one. This is about the supervisee relationship. It's not completely symmetrical. There are power disbalances, and many of the novels tap on that issue, on the supervisee relationship, and the dependency it entails, and how awfully things can go wrong there in many ways. And this is the example of the incentives. We look basically at numbers of publications and citation only when we decide on grant applications, vacancy, promotion, tenure, and awards. There are many initiatives trying to change it, and I support them completely, but it's still the sad situation is that when you want to get far in science, you need to publish a lot and to be cited a lot. That is such a strong perverse incentives. Organizations, great organizations like DORA and COARA, they are trying to change that, to reform the research assessment. Citation counts and publication counts should become less important by giving also career points for the stuff that really matters, the responsible research practices, like making your method and data open, being a good peer reviewer, a good supervisor, an excellent teacher, and a team member. And all these elements you see back in the novels. Now, how can we learn about research integrity? You can take the normative approach, like Robert Merton did, and also Karl Popper. I'm still a Popperian, although I know that it's not going this way in practice, sadly. You can study that practice, like I did with a survey, or you can do other quantitative empirical attempts, but you can also do qualitative research of the ethnographic form, being a fly on the wall. These are two books I really loved when I was a student, and I still believe they're great. This is anthropology in the lab, and there you can see what really happens in labs. You can also read biographies. This is one of my scientific heroes, Darwin, or about famous people, the infamous culprit who fabricated a lot of data and have 58 protections on his name, my country fellow Diederik Stapel. His autobiography is also translated and freely available on the web, and it shows a little bit from the inside how it is to be living the life of a scholarly fraud. And you can read case histories like Plastic Fantastic and the Baltimore case. They're great books, many pages, and they're utterly boring due to all the details in there. And that is the advantage of novels. Novels can also describe drivers and consequences of research misconduct and sloppy science, but they can be vivid. They can be compellingly vivid. They can relate to the emotions more than to the intellectual stuff. And you can omit all the boring details in a novel, and you can even make up facts. A fabrication of facts is not permissible in scholarly research, but it is recommended when you write a novel. And these people of the novels, they use that to make the story more lively. And sometimes these novels look a little bit inside the head of the culprits and the other players in the narrative. And with introspection and writing that down, these monologues, you can promote understanding, I believe. So that was the reason I got interested in novels about 12 years ago when I had my sabbatical after being the leadership of the university. And so far, I've read a lot, and I've identified 6 for you to say a little bit about. But really, you should read the books yourself if you want and if you're interested. This is written by a scholar, Carl Gerasi. It's a well-written book, I believe. And in the afterwards, he explains again that many scholars make the data fit to their brilliant theories, Newton and Mendel among them. And that has been documented quite plausibly. And in this book, a research assistant gives an helping hand in the same way. The PI has a wonderful theory about the etiology of oncology, a specific kind of oncology. And, well, he bends the facts a little bit to that splendid theory. It is recognized, it's published in Nature, and then the PI discovers that there was fraud in the experimental evidence. But he keeps silence about it, and he decides to do himself a new experiment, completely different, and that experiment confirms his theory. So I said, well, it was true anyway, most likely. They collectively, a few years down the line, get the Nobel Prize. The PI still stays silent. The assistant struggled with his conscience, but not much happens further on. The problems in this novel are fabrication and falsification, obviously, and the drivers excessive ambition and competition, and also fear of consequences of blowing the whistle, specifically here losing the Nobel Prize. The second one is this book on the Baltimore case. There is that book I alluded to before, giving all the facts, and this is loosely based on it. And the perspective is multifold, but mainly a junior investigator perspective. The first one gets really spectacular results. Again, a Nature publication. Novelist loved nature, it appears. The lab subsequently, and that you see that happen often, focuses on that topic because it is so promising. And then another junior, a newer one, fails to reproduce the initial finding, and she starts digging. She starts digging and digging deeper, talking to people, and she discovers a lot of fishy things, like sometimes happens. And then this person, this junior investigator, becomes a whistleblower. The initial culprit is convicted for research misconduct by the Office of Research Integrity even, but that on appeal is cancelled from the perspective of the novel only due to a legalistic technicality. And then it enters the political range. A senator who doesn't like at all science and research, he uses this case in a crusade against science. And we've all seen that happen in many countries. And well, now in the USA first and foremost again, but you see it in many countries, you see this happen. The problem of the novel, so it completely goes out of hand. The problems of the novels are falsification in the sense of selective removal of data points and a wide range of questionable research practices. Basically, the whole catalog is in the book. And the driver seems to be a toxic culture, leaders and supervisors not talking to their supervisees and being away on prestigious conferences all the time. There is hardly any supervision. There's excessive pressure on people to produce, overproductive, clearly, and there are steep power disbalances, and that doesn't help either. This is a completely different book. This is a book, and you can see it on the picture. It's in my home city, Amsterdam, so that's another reason I like it. And this is about a PhD student who gets her first postdoc job in a company. A little bit too early and a little bit too much responsibility. And the reason she gets the job is that she has written a PhD thesis on a very, very sophisticated technique that is useful for that company. And that company is in the business of drug research. It's a small start until scaling up company that has only one entity, but it's very promising. It's very promising for Alzheimer's disease. But so far, so good. And now this young postdoc, she discovers with her new machinery that the drug perfectly works in mice models of Alzheimer, but is not working in humans. And it cannot work in humans due to differences between mice and humans. But she's embarrassed and she is inexperienced and she has no idea what to say about it and how to say it. She sees that this will be the bankrupt of her new company. So she stays silent until it's too late. And in addition, she gets an affair with the principal investigator, who is the director of the company as well. That these things happen when people are young and even when they're old. Then the opportunity arises to redo a study because another problem pops up with the drug entity in animals. And she does a similar trick. She shows now with the PI present in the lab, she makes sure that he is there. And he acknowledged that this is deadly for the entity they have. And he promises to tell all the others and to decide what to do next. Sorry. But then he makes the evidence disappear. He fires the postdoc, and the postdoc, she is completely in disarray and finally becomes an aggressive whistleblower with the help of her former PhD supervisor and a colleague from the company who is the head of the ICT of the company, and can restore some of the stuff that the PI has made go away. Now, the company and also the career of the PI ends. And interestingly, the postdoc, she decides to leave academia as well and become a poet. And the novel suggests that this is a happy ending. I don't know. The problem here is selective reporting, ignoring important evidence. So it's not reporting. In fact, well, it's a problem with non-publication, obviously, and even not telling your colleagues. And this is usually labeled as a questionable research practice, but it's much more. In this instance, it's full-blown research misconduct because it's so important in this example. And that shows that these things, these phenomena are context dependent and are situated on a continuum. The drivers here are fear of loss, all kinds of loss, loss of job, loss of prestige, loss of money, loss of love, what have you. Emotional confusion, especially within the postdoc. Lack of experience also within the postdoc, and a steep power disbalance again. That power disbalance is in almost all novels, like we know is everywhere in practice as well. This novel is from one of my favorite writers, Ian McEwan. It's Solar, called Solar, and it's about a Nobel laureate again, and he is selected to lead a very prestigious new energy transition institute. And he gets a leadership position because the whole country depends on him to have right ideas where to go with energy transition. But the sad truth is that the guy is over the top of his career and he has no clue. He has no new ideas at all. But then he finds one. He finds one in the legacy of a colleague, a young colleague, a postdoc who recently passed away. And he makes that idea his own. Again, intellectual thefts of idea in a way. Now, the deceit is detective, and almost everything that can go wrong in the life of an academic goes wrong in this life. It's an awful story in that sense, but it's written amazingly well, and humoristic as well. And the plot is a bit absurd. There are murders in it as well, and all types of improbable phenomena. But at the same time, the writer makes it alarmingly recognizable, and it's a lot of fun to read this book. It's about theft of ideas. I alluded already to that. It's about vanity, which is quite prevalent in academia, as most of you know. And it's about disturbed personality. And the Nobel laureate is really narcissistic as well, and autistic probably in the bargain. And also, again, fear of reputation loss. Now, on research integrity, you have also thrillers. This is a research integrity thriller. In this instance, in the history, long time ago, a graduate student, her work was stolen by her supervisor, and she never got recognition for that. She takes revenge when the supervisor has already passed away by destroying his reputation in a fabricated paper. She needed that to prove the real theft. At least that is what she believed. And then the daughter of that supervisor, who is an academic herself, but in a completely different brand of academia, she discovered the fraud and make sure that her dad, the former supervisor, is reinstalled in the honors he had in the past. The former graduate student, who is now a professor herself, is forced to retire early because of the activity of the daughter, and then she takes revenge on that daughter. It's a little bit complex, but when you read it, you will understand it. And it's with suspense, and it takes until the last pages of the novel until you get a clue what is about to happen and how this all will end. It's really a brilliant book, I believe. It's about plagiarism again, intellectual thefts, followed by 2 instances of fabrication. Because that is what the graduate student did to the daughter. she lured her into writing a fabricated book and then tried to unmask her. So there was blackmail in place as well. The driver's ambitions for both subjects in the story, extreme anger, former students, and then substantial sloppiness among the daughter. I also recommend this book. Well, I recommend them all. And finally, but not lastly, this is inspired by Animal Farm of Orwell, and it's called Animal University, and it's humoristic as well. And the funny thing of this book, in a way, is that it is written under a pseudonym by a real academic who is a whistleblower as well. And well, she wanted to take revenge in an artistic way, you could say. And the interesting thing is that she approached me about a year ago, and now she's revising and publishing a second edition under her real name. And in that, she wanted some inputs for her final chapter of the book. It's strongly inspired by the Diederik Stapel case, so real cases are inspiration for this type of book. And it's also inspired by the Jeffrey Beall's list of predatory journals, and also the fate of Jeffrey Beall's. He was forced to retire early because of this list of predatory journals. The institutional response on what happens in this book is grossly inadequate, and you see that quite often. And as you also see quite often, is that whistleblowers suffer the worst consequences. The narrative is at the same time very entertaining and very funny. It's a sad story, which is funny as well. Issues are manifold: fabrication, conflict of interest, breaches of publication ethics, refusals to refract, and the power disabuse is again in this book, as is the fear of reputational loss, especially of the leaders of the university, the Animal University. Now, taking together, how useful are these novels? And my answer is, I have no clue. I don't know because I haven't studied it. That's a typical academic answer, but I really mean it here. My main point is that I like them. I find them interesting and entertaining. My assumption is, and I do have some limited experience on that, on the anecdotal level, is that they can be useful in research integrity education. You can use the novels for recommended individual reading. I always do when I give a lecture to PhD students or postdocs or deans or whatever on research integrity. I recommend a few of these novels to them. You can also, and I've done that in the past, organize a kind of book clubs, do collective reading followed by groups discussion. And you can also make up cases from them, vignettes for discussions in class. There is a lot of debate about whether you should real cases and cases in the experience of your students in class, or use made-up cases, vignettes, as you say. And I started with the real cases, but that can be really complex and get emotional in a way which is not that practical in classes. So I'm now more in favor of vignettes, and novels can greatly help you to find the suitable stories for that. And that ends my story as well. If you want to see the PDF with all the reference below the slide, that's a link. On the link side, the QR code, and the right side QR code leads to the preprint itself. But as said before, it will be sent around anyway. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lex. I will just stop the recording now so we can get started on the Q&A.